Good afternoon and welcome to the January 28th Audit Committee. Roll call, please.
Audit Committee Member Ed Kashadurian.
Here.
Tom O'Shaughnessy.
Here.
Alex Parajon.
Present.
Fahik Saturian is absent, and Chair Zare Amirian.
I am here. Let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 2, business agenda. The agenda for the January 28th, 2021 Audit Committee meeting was posted on Monday, January 25th, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Item number 3, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. The committee may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The Audit Committee Chair may refer the matter to staff for investigation and report.
As I do not have any indication that we have members of the public calling in yet, but I will I may leave this or move this item depending on whether or not we get any calls in order to encourage participation from the public. Let's move on to item number 4, please.
Item number 4, approval of minutes. Minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on October 29, 2020.
Moving to approve.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Audit Committee Member Ed Kashadurian.
Yes.
Tom O'Shaughnessy.
Yes.
Alex Parajon.
Yes.
Fahik Saturian is absent, and Chair Zare Amirian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Item number 5, action items.
We have no action items. Let's move on to item number 6, please.
Item number 6, reports and information. 6A, internal audit activity report as of December 31st, 2020. Jesse Jong, internal audit manager.
What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to switch items 6A and 6B in order to allow our outside auditors to deliver their report first. So let's have 6B read in, please.
Item 6B, comprehensive annual financial report and report to the Audit Committee from Clifton Larson Allen, LLP. Teresa Clark, Finance Accounting Manager.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Clark.
Good afternoon, Chair Amiriam and committee members. My name is Teresa Clark, Accounting Manager. I'm here today to present the comprehensive annual financial report or better known as CAFR, for fiscal year ending June 30, 2020. I will be discussing the CAFR, fiscal year and audit results. At the end, I will be introducing Daphne Munoz, engagement partner from Clifton Larson Allen, for her presentation. Before I discuss the CAFR, I wanted to talk about our external auditor. A year ago, we selected White Nelson Deal Evans as city's new external auditor. Last November 2020, White Nelson Deal Evans merged with Clifton Larson Allen. Despite the merger, the contract and audit team stayed the same. CAFR preparation is a long process. It normally takes us 6 to 7 months to complete the audit and CAFR preparation. Because of the pandemic, the fieldwork audit for fiscal year 2019-2020 was done virtually. CAFR is divided into 3 sections: introductory, financial, and statistical section. The introductory section includes transmittal letter, city's officials, and city's organizational chart. The financial section includes auditor's report, management's discussion and analysis, notes to the basic financial statements, entities' basic financial statements, as well as required supplementary information. The last section is the statistical section. This section includes financial, economic, and demographic information. Most of the schedule includes a 10-year history. This slide shows the entity-wide statement of net position. The statement is similar to a balance sheet. As of June 30, 2020, the city reported over 1.6 billion of net position. Out of this total, 942 million is for governmental activities and 728 million is for business type activities. The next statement is statement of activities for all funds. This statement is similar to income statement. For fiscal year 2019-2020, the city reported 13 million increase in net position. Next, I will talk about the fiscal year and audit results. The auditor issues three reports: auditor's opinion, report on internal control over financial reporting, and communication with those charged with governance. The auditor's opinion is located on page 1 of the CAFR. In fiscal year 2019-2020, the city received an unmodified opinion. This is the best opinion that the city can receive. Next, I wanted to call on Daphne Munoz, engagement partner from Clifton Larson Allen, to talk about the fiscal year end audit results in more details.
Welcome, Ms. Munoz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me go share my screen. Again, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Again, my name is Daphne Munoz, a principal from Clifton Larson Allen, and I'm here today to present the results of our audit for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. My presentation will cover the following: scope of our services, our auditor's opinion, our report on internal control over financial reporting, and lastly, our communication with those charged with governance. So for scope of our services, we performed an audit of the financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020, in accordance with generally accepted and government auditing standards. That also includes the audit of the financial statements of the electric utility and water utility funds. We will also perform an audit of the federal grant expenditures under uniform guidance, commonly referred to as a single audit, and that is currently in process. And we have also issued an agreed upon procedures in relation to the city's calculation of the appropriations limit. First thing that I'm going to go over is our auditor's opinion, which is on page 1 of the comprehensive annual financial report. The first paragraph of that report talks about the period that is covered by our audit. So for this audit, the period that we're auditing is July 1st, 2019 through June 30, 2020. The financial statements.
Hi, Daphne. Sorry to interrupt. I think your PowerPoint slides is not shared in full screen.
Oh,
So we're looking. So we
you're
can
showing
see
sorry.
your other screen as well. So
Let me see.
yeah, perfect.
Oh, okay.
And there is a little something on the top right corner of the screen. Sorry, do you know, like, is it on my screen only or?
No, I can see it too. It's a shaded gray screen area. You may want to press escape or clear it somehow.
Can you still see it right now? I apologize.
No worries. This is new to many of us. I believe it might be one of the thumbnails or a floating thumbnail.
Okay.
Maybe it can just be moved off to the upper right or lower right corner.
Unfortunately, I can't see.
Yeah, so you expanded it. There we go.
Okay, now it's good.
Oh, I apologize.
No worries.
Um,
Please continue.
The second paragraph talks about the financial statement. The responsibility for the financial statements are management's, as well as the adoption of internal controls over those financial statements. Our responsibility as auditor is to express opinions on those financial statements. We conducted our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the U.S., as well as standards, as well as government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. And those standards require us to plan and perform our audit to obtain reasonable assurance on whether the financial statements are free of material misstatements. As Teresa mentioned, we have issued, as a result of that, our audit, unmodified opinions, which means that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. So it's a clean opinion. That's the best opinion that any auditee can get. Also, in accordance with our audit, we considered the district's internal control over financial reporting to determine whether our audit procedures are appropriate for the purpose of expressing our opinion. However, we do not issue an opinion on the an opinion on the internal controls over financial reporting. We did not find any material weaknesses. This year, we did have 3 recommendations regarding supervision over closing procedures, closing of construction in progress, and inventory management. Our communication with those charged with governance, the plan, scope, and timing of our audit for the June 30, 2020 audit was communicated in an engagement letter and planning letter dated May 22nd, 2020, and those letters were also presented during the July 30th audit committee meeting. Management is responsible for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies, and those policies are described in Note 1 to the financial statements. The financial statements include significant estimates for which actual results could differ from those estimates. And some of the significant estimates that are included in the financial statements are the fair value of the investments, the depreciable lives of capital assets, the required contributions, pension expense, related net pension liability, and deferred inflows and outflows are based on actual valuations provided by CalPERS actuary. The OPEB expense, net OPEB liability, and deferred outflows and inflows of resources related to the city's OPEB plan are based on actual valuations provided by third-party actuaries hired by the city. The sick leave conversion related to expense and related to the city's retirees' health plan is also based on a valuation by an actuary hired by the city, as well as the claims payable liabilities. And lastly, the liability related to the landfill post-closure is based on an estimate. The most sensitive disclosures included in the financial statements are disclosed in Note 1 regarding the retirees' health savings plan, Note 8 regarding the CalPERS defined benefit pension plan, Note 9 regarding the OPEB plan, 11 regarding the claims payable, 12 regarding the landfill closure and post-closure care costs, and lastly, Note 18 discloses the restatement of the fund balances and net position. We did not have difficulties during our audit. We proposed certain adjustments that were identified as a result of our audit procedures, and management have corrected all those adjustments. We have also identified certain misstatements that in the management has determined that the effects are not material to the financial statements. Therefore, those are not reflected in the financial statements. But however, the list of those misstatements are included in the exit letter. We did not have any disagreements during the course of our audit. Management has supplied us a representation letter dated November 30th. And that letter just management has represented to us that they have provided us all the information necessary for our audit. And to our knowledge, the city did not consult with other accountants regarding any auditing or accounting matters. That concludes my presentation, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Munoz. Any questions from my fellow committee members?
I have a quick question. Could you,
Mr. Kasturian?
Yes, sorry. This is Ed Kashadurian. You were talking about there were no findings, but I think there was something called like a significant either recommendations or the significant deficiencies. Could you please tell us a little bit about like the inventory or the construction in progress? What those deficiencies really refer to?
So I'll go over the inventory first. So when we were looking at the inventory for this relates to the electric in the water and power, we looked at the controls, and one of the controls is supposedly a cycle count, and we've discovered that because of munis, the district hasn't, the city haven't had a chance to perform a cycle count. Therefore, as a result of that, we did a test of the perpetual inventory to the floor, the physical count, and what we've identified during that count is there was some differences between the physical count, between what's on the what's physically out there compared to what is in the perpetual inventory. And as a result, we did had a meeting with GWP and the finance, and they ended up doing a full physical inventory. And actually, after the physical inventory, although there was an adjustment, the adjustment ended up being not material. However, we just thought that there was a break in control as far as the ledger is not being reconciled to the physical inventory.
I know you're going to also talk about the construction, but if memory serves me well, we did have a conversation regarding this, right? Last year or the year before. Jesse, do you?
Michelle?
I think that's related to fleet. It's not.
Had a conversation regarding the transformers and the way they were replaced, and
Yeah, it was sometime last year.
Oh, the transformer inventory one. That one.
The transformer inventory didn't have any significant deficiency in terms of count, etc. I wouldn't consider that significant.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Munoz, can we briefly go over the other two items as well, since we're talking about these?
So the construction in progress comment was, again, we looked at the construction in progress schedule as that was provided to us and did some inquiries on whether those projects that are shown as in process as to when it is estimated to be completed, and because of those procedures, as inquiries were made from other departments, it was determined that there were several big projects that should have been closed and should have started depreciation, and they ended up having that adjustment to close it. Some of them were actually for projects that should have been closed the year before.
Okay, thank you. And then the supervision of closing procedures?
The supervision of closing procedures as part of our, just during the course of our audit, there were just several adjustments that were a result of our audit procedures that our comment is just to make sure that at the end of the year, the balances are reconciled and reviewed so that those adjustments will not occur in the future. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members regarding Ms. Munoz's presentation?
This is Ed Kashadurian again. I have a quick
Mr.
question for clarification. Yes, thank you. On the very first slide, I think before you started your portion of the presentation, we looked at I guess it was a balance sheet that separated assets based on the government and the business. This was just a question for my own personal edification. Is there usually a acceptable ratio between how much assets is like government, how much business for other municipalities that you're working with? Is there something that maybe, we can learn from, looking at these numbers across other regions and for other municipalities?
Well, as far as I would say acceptable ratio, I wouldn't say that there's like a general one size fits all acceptable ratio, but usually we look at the liquidity of the city and also any funding, looking at long term and what are the ratio of your liabilities to your assets as far as long term liabilities.
And what about business versus government, that allocation?
Again, it depends on the composition of the business. I can't say that there's, again, one size fits all as far as the a ratio between business and government, because those two are completely different operations.
So it wouldn't be odd if, like, in one city you have like a lot more business assets compared to, let's say, I mean, it's not the case here, but I'm just generally asking, versus government.
Yeah, no, that's not something that we really, whether one business has more assets or whether a business type activity has more assets than a government. Mm-hmm. A governmental activity could actually, assets could be a lot more inflated because of infrastructure and such. So then you take that into consideration as far as the total assets for a governmental activity.
Does that mean that they're not calculated on the same basis, or?
No, it just depends on how old or how new the city is. There will be some cities that are built out where infrastructure is.
Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kasturian.
If I may, Chair Marion, Michelle Flynn, Director of Finance. Just to clarify, for Mr. Kachaturian, on that schedule, so between governmental and business operations, the fund structure determines what category that fund falls into. So the general fund and a lot of our grant funds fall into the governmental side of the equation. The business operations are the enterprise operations, such as Glendale Water and Power, refuse, sewer. Those are supported by a rate structure. So they operate more as if you would like a regular business. So that it all depends on, as Ms. Munoz indicated, the government and how it's structured and what the services are that city provides as to which funds they have, thus then which categories they fall into.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, very good. Thank you, Ms. Munoz and Ms. Clark. And if there's nothing else, we will move on to item 6A, please. Item 6A, Ms. Antonessian, if you would just reread that, please.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Item 6A, Internal Audit Activity Report as of December 31st, 2020. Jessie Zhang, Internal Audit Manager.
Ms. Zhang.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon again, Mr. Chair and Audit Committee members. My name is Jessie Zhang, Internal Audit Manager. This afternoon, I would like to provide you a report on the internal audit activities for the quarter ended December 31st, 2020. As outlined at the beginning of the report, there are a total 7 sections. Project completed is the first section. During this past quarter, we've issued 2 reports. This afternoon, we have prepared 2 PowerPoint presentations for you. These 2 audits are quite different from each other, and one is related to employees, and the other will actually impact both employees and the entire Glendale community. Again, I hope you will find our presentations informative, and then the projects we have completed show the value internal audit added to the city operations under your leadership. So the first audit to be presented to you is the payroll code audit. The focus of this audit is on the various negotiated pays that certain employees receive in addition to their base pay. Our internal auditor, Ani Athanasian, worked on this audit, and there are 2 observations reported. So Ani, you may start to present when you're ready.
Sure, thanks, Jesse.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Marion and Audit Committee members. My name is Ani Antonessian, and I'm an internal auditor with IPA. Today, I'll be presenting to you the payroll codes audit completed last quarter. Payroll codes are administered by the Payroll Division in Finance in coordination with Human Resources. There are many payroll codes available in the city. For instance, the base salary pay code is available to all full-time positions. There are also pay codes that designate additional pays. These are defined as compensation above the base salary for special assignments, differentials, certifications that are earned by employees only after meeting certain criteria. During this audit, we focused on additional pays as a result of a risk assessment performed on all payroll codes in the city. These additional pays are all detailed in various MOUs, as Jesse mentioned, which result from negotiations between employee bargaining groups and the city. There are more than 100 additional pays available, and they are granted to employees for a variety of reasons, such as an incentive to become certified in one's position, to reward employees that have specialized skills. For instance, we have city employees that are trained in Lean Six Sigma Black Belt or Green Belt designation, and to compensate employees for being available during non-regular hours. This chart shows the additional pay categories for the pays that were in our audit scope for fiscal year 1920. Post pays, various assignment pays, and certification pays are the top categories. We also wanted to bring to attention the fact that all these additional pays have some type of condition that needs to be met for the employee to receive the pay. Additionally, there are some pays that have more than one condition that need to be met prior to payout, such as the evening shift differential here. For instance, the employee receiving this pay must work from 3 to 12 a.m. for a minimum of 4 hours. The minimum hours can be achieved between different combinations. Certain positions cannot receive the pay. An employee cannot receive the pay while getting certain other pays. And an employee that works this shift in a police record bureau between certain hours does not have to work the minimum required hours. Next, we can review the objective of this audit, which was to determine whether adequate controls are in place to ensure that pay codes are set up in munis according to conditions described in various MOUs, and that employees are receiving additional pays accurately. The scope of the audit covers additional pays from various MOUs that were in munis in September 2020, with payments to employees during fiscal year 1920. To perform the audit, we interviewed finance, HR staff, and a representative of an employee bargaining group. Also reviewed MOUs to identify the authoritative sources for the pays, and reviewed in-scope pays to ensure that they are properly set up in Munis and that they are being paid to employees based on MOUs. There were a total of 2 areas for improvement that we identified in the audit. I have summarized these findings into the following categories. Number 1, additional pay discrepancies, and 2, additional pay policies and procedures. So let's review audit result 1. Based on a review of the 146 additional pays against the conditions set in MOUs, we found 10 pays, or 7%, had discrepancies that affected 16 employees, with a dollar impact ranging from 0 to 7,900, for instance, during fiscal year 1920. 16 employees were being paid inaccurately due to a variety of issues, such as during position changes in the city, the pay associated with the previous position would migrate with the employee to the new one, or a position change would prompt a bargaining group change, and once again, the previous pay would migrate with the employee. Some cases, the employees were simply assigned an incorrect pay code and were receiving the incorrect pay amount. And in certain cases, they were receiving the correct pay amount, but were just placed in the incorrect pay category. We recommend that payroll review these discrepancies and make the necessary adjustments. Additionally, to prevent such errors going forward, controls should be put in place that ensure employees receive additional pays correctly based on the correct position, bargaining unit, the correct amount, and all other conditions that are indicated on the MOUs. And finally, audit result number 2. The errors that we found also resulted from a lack of clearly documented and delineated procedures that already exist. So this process would benefit from a clearly documented oversight structure that holds various stakeholders responsible for each part of administering additional pay. Furthermore, it is not documented in procedures who the responsible parties are that will ensure that additional pays that are set up in Munis will be tied to legitimate pays found in MOUs. Other issues that we came across during the pay setup process, for instance, when a new pay is set up, staff need to ascertain whether the pay will be subject to overtime pay or be part of an employee's pension. These steps are not thoroughly documented currently. And finally, each additional pay has multiple conditions that need to be met prior to payout. It is currently not documented comprehensively who the responsible parties are for monitoring all additional pays and their conditions to ensure that employees are paid accurately. This concludes my presentation. I'd like to recognize and thank the finance and HR departments for their assistance during this project. I can now take any questions that you may have, and in attendance, we also have staff from finance and HR departments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Antonesian. Questions from the committee members? Let's go, Mr. Parhon, please.
Hi. So my question is, with the findings that you discovered, what is the value that you discovered adjustments to be made?
What is the value of, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so how much was it that you had to make adjustments for?
Oh, okay. So the highest discrepancy that we found for an employee was about 7,900 for the fiscal year. And I think the total was around 12,000.
Okay.
Just for the fiscal year. There were some overpayments and some were underpaid. So it wasn't just, specifically, that we were overpaying an employee or whatnot. There were different discrepancies.
Okay, great. And now discovering the discrepancies and how this occurred, is it, from your understanding, is it a training issue primarily, or is it just certain paperwork just didn't get through the pipeline to get to the payroll department?
I think The control that was there was that, you know, as these positions, the employees are changing. Maybe it was just an extra pair of eyes that were missing, because the system itself doesn't have automatic controls that can check and have conditional logic based on, you know, this is the bargaining group that's tied to this additional pay. So it really is that the kind of reliant on manual controls at this point. So I think it was just part human error, part maybe, you know, the cause of it was maybe an extra pair of eyes on the department side. And as we mentioned, the oversight and responsible parties that should be delineated clearly would help out to strengthen controls.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Kashturian, I believe you were.
Yes.
At the same time.
Yes, thank you. So the question that I have is not necessarily regarding the presentation, but I wanted to understand better the categories that you mentioned for the extra pay. I believe you had like overtime and then shift and this and that. Could you just maybe walk us through the process through which these categories are determined? Is it, I understand it's determined as part of a bargaining process that you mentioned. So could you maybe speak to that a little bit? And then the other question that I have is that, is it possible for, let's say, an employee, if I'm not wrong, I saw 4 categories of extra pay. Is it possible for like an employee or a staff to qualify for, let's say, 3 overpay items per se? And then how does that affect the pension situation? Does that affect, like, you mentioned something, I didn't quite catch that, so if could you just speak to that as well? I would appreciate it.
Sure. So the figure that I presented during my presentation is actually auditor created categories. So these were just ways for us to lump together certain pays to illustrate, you know, the total impact of each pay for that fiscal year. But there are more than 200 additional pays available. And as I said, they are given for various reasons. It's whether to incentivize employees to have expertise in their field, it's a certification, or we require employees to be available during non-regular hours. So they receive additional pays for many reasons. And in terms of the second question, your second question about how, sorry, I forgot which.
How is it determined? It's like part of a.
Can they receive multiple?
Yes.
Pays?
Yes, they can. Right, they can receive multiple pays, depending on, for instance, some police officers may receive a post pay, and they're on a special like K9 assignment, right? So they could be receiving potentially 2 pays or more, right?
And is there a mechanism to check to see over the span of 5-6 years, is there consistently like overpayments to specific employees? Or was that ever like an issue for you to think about in terms of your audit, so that to see if there's some system level issues that need to be addressed?
I'm not, like I said, it would have been good if the system had ways to automatically control and catch these errors, but at this point they are manual, and that was one risk that we considered in terms of, are the employees being paid? Is the pay being paid out correctly based on the position and the bargaining group that they're in? So in those ways, we did catch these, in certain instances, overpayments or underpayments. And I think you had another question about the pension, and that's one of the other issues that we had is when a new pay is set up, there are check marks that staff have to go through when setting up the additional pay. So an additional pay may be subject to an employee's pension or overtime pay. And in our, as part of our observation was to just document that process a little more. So there was more transparency around that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Shaughnessy, do you have any questions?
Am I correct on there's a section where you marked off that police communications was not subject to that particular charge? Because is that because the police communication is on a continual rotational basis where they work all different shifts throughout the month?
That specific pay was just used as an example. In terms of them not receiving that, I'm not actually sure why they don't receive the evening shift differential, but it was police communications operator cannot receive the evening shift differential, and the police communications shift supervisor. Yeah.
If someone could get back to us on that, because I'm curious if they have an elevated rate of pay no matter what hours they work, because it's on a continual rotational basis. And I didn't notice a mention of fire, or is fire under Verdugo dispatch in a different area?
Yeah, we can look into that and get back to you, Mr. O'Shaughnessy, about the police communications operator.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Ms. Flynn?
Chair Marion, Mr. O'Shaughnessy, I'd like to try to address that question a little bit, and perhaps Mr. Doyle, our HR director, can help too. All additional pays are negotiated with each of the bargaining groups. I'm not exactly sure on that one particular one why they don't get that pay. However, we could find out, or maybe Matt knows. Also, with regards to the PERSable portion of the additional pays, that is driven by PERS. So we take our guidance from PERS, and they publish all the literature and communication to for all the cities to relate to be able to know what is PERSable and what is not PERSable. It's not just up to us to make that determination. So Matt, do you have anything to add on that other pay?
Sure. Chair Marion, members of the committee, my name is Matt Doyle. I'm the HR director. And as Ms. Flynn said, these items, the extra pay are, as you can see, there are an abundance of them in the public sector, but they are negotiated in the various MOUs. And, we try to maintain a competitive stance relative to both pay and benefits, as well as the extra pay items. And this is what you're seeing amongst these groups are not at all atypical of what you'd find in other cities and other government jurisdictions. With regard to the question about the dispatchers for police and fire, I'm not sure the specific issue we were looking at, if it was shift pay or meal pay or something like that. But typically, those shifts or those jobs that require operational assignments 24/7, which is certainly the case you have in public safety, and certainly the case of dispatchers in both police and fire. That is actually part of their job, to work those shifts. And typically, you won't see, shift pays or evening pays or graveyard pays for those types of operations, because it's understood when you go to apply for those jobs, that's what you're going to have to do. It's just a part of life, that you work nights, you're going to have to work weekends, you're going to have to work holidays, whatever the case may be. So typically, you will not see some of those extra pay items that you would see on a normal 40-hour-a-week group of employees.
Okay, that explains it then. It's a weighted rotational that's just built into it. So there's nothing you need to get back to me on then. That was just my question for clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shaughnessy. I have several questions. Just to follow up on Mr. Parahone's question. So what was the sample size that was looked at where you came up with the kind of total dollar amount of $13,000 or $14,000 of both overpayments and underpayments?
Right. So we looked at 146 that were in scope. There were a total of, at the time when we looked at in Munis, 448 pays. So the 146 was in scope, and 10 of them had discrepancies.
Got it. So you looked at 146 out of 400 and you said 40?
448, yeah.
Okay. And then is there any plan, and this might be for Mr. Doyle, is there any plan to look at those other pays considering the findings, the audit findings?
Chair Marion, members of the committee, I would be certainly open to that. Again, the operating departments that are subject to these audits typically don't direct the performance of the audits. So again, whatever follow-up would need to occur, we'd certainly be happy to cooperate with that. If there are groups or things that need to be looked into further, I'd have no objection. I'm sure Ms. Flynn, neither would she.
Absolutely. And we also, as part of the controls that we're implementing in payroll, is that we will be circulating a report out of the system to all the departments for them on a regular basis for them to routinely check to make sure employees within their departments and sections do have the proper additional pays allocated to them. So if there is a position change that gets triggered, that anything that would change with that position, that they would see that if it didn't happen, that we can make that correction sooner rather than later. So that is a good control that we're going to be implementing. Actually, we've started looking at putting that report together, getting that out in this first quarter.
Yeah, and I think it might just be prudent considering the amounts don't seem like they're material in a sense of the total budget of the city. However, they might be material to an employee who might be receiving less of a payment than they should have, and just they have no idea. And that kind of leads into my next question: Are any of these additional pays discretionary? Are they? Is there any non-objective additional pay that is made based upon the discretion of whomever is responsible for assigning that additional pay?
Chair Marion, members of the committee, I can't think of any that would be completely discretionary. As has been said, most of these are for a particular assignment or a particular skill level, or things like your uniforms. It's pretty objective criteria, and for the life of me, I can't think of anything that would be discretionary. For some supervisor to make a decision that this person should get this extra pay, this person should not. It's pretty straightforward, and again, if I would think that our employee associations and the groups that negotiate these items would be unlikely to request those types of discretionary things. It's just simpler to assign it on an objective basis, as opposed to another way. I mean, some of the things we have, foreign language, standby pay. These are things you either have or you don't, or you're things that you're either assigned to or not. And when you come off those special assignments, then there is a mechanism working through payroll to remove people from those assignments and no longer receive that pay. So a great question, but I really can't think of anything.
I appreciate that. And so, I know in the private sector, there are some significant liabilities and risks associated with mispayment of employees. Given that these are collectively bargained in large part, what are the repercussions of mispayments?
Chair Marion, members of the committee, the repercussions are such that, first of all, an effort is made to address whether it's an overpayment or an underpayment, in a timely fashion. If it's an overpayment, then under the law, we have to work with that employee to work out some sort of method of repayment. It's actually not permitted to simply make a determination that, okay, we've overpaid this employee by $5,000 and we're going to make it up on the next paycheck. Under the law, we have to, it's actually under the labor code, we have to work something out with them. And that employee, has to agree to it. If the employee decides not to agree with it, then we have mechanisms to file a claim against the employee. But typically, they will go along with it, and we'll work something out over the course of 6 months to a year, or even 2 years, to get that repayment. And again, the same goes with an underpayment. We would try to rectify that as quickly as possible. As far as for the, if what repercussions there would be for the person responsible, if it's something, gross and negligent, then we might be dealing with disciplinary action for the person in charge. If it's, something that it's just an error or oversight or something like that, then in all likelihood there wouldn't be, that level of accountability.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I was more curious in terms of how the laws, how state laws maybe affect, treat kind of the public employee pay versus private employee pay. Is there just no difference in terms of how state law is applicable to that?
There are some differences, but for the most part, it's more or less dealt with this in the same fashion. You will find some things in the labor code or the government code that will say, this does not apply to state and local government payroll or something along those lines. But that's somewhat rare.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question is kind of a general question. In terms of these collectively bargained additional pays, can you just explain how that collective, just very generally, how that collective bargaining takes place? So the, between the employees union and the city, how does that process work out?
Certainly, Chair Marion, members of the committee. The city of Glendale has 5 employee bargaining units: the Police Officers Association, Firefighters Association, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Glendale Management Association, and the Glendale City Employees Association. And the last one I mentioned is probably the largest and the most diverse, and it applies to all of our non-management, non-safety employees. It's about 700 individuals. And each of these groups we have labor contracts with. They're called MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding. And we negotiate these agreements generally over a term that lasts anywhere from 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years at a time. And essentially, when it comes time for these MOU agreements to expire, in the months subsequent to that expiration, we begin the labor negotiations process. And that process, let's say we have an MOU with the Firefighters Association that's going to expire. And again, typically we run these on a fiscal year basis. And so they'll run from July 1st through June 30th. And so if we know our MOU with the Firefighters Association is going to expire on June 30th of 2021, it's right around now, or in March, April of that year, where we would begin the process of meeting and conferring with them and addressing the labor negotiations. And it's purely a negotiation where the management team sits down and negotiates with representatives of that particular bargaining unit. It could be over the course of 4 or 5 sessions. It could take 20 or 30 sessions. Just depends on how far apart we are in the negotiations process. But typically, the management team will get direction from the city council on what we're willing to offer, what we're able to provide, and that is done in closed session with the city council. That's one of the rare circumstances where the city council is allowed to meet under in a confidential setting to address labor relations. And we get direction from the city council before we go in and negotiate, and the union or the employee associations gets their marching orders from their membership as to what they want to ask for. And it's, from there, it's a typical back and forth negotiation process where, they ask for this amount and we're willing to offer that amount. And hopefully, we get to a point where after sometimes several months, we're able to come to agreement. And then once we do that, we tentatively agree, we shake hands, and we write up that agreement in the form of a written memorandum of understanding. I have one with me right here. And essentially, we bring that to our city council for final adoption, and then the MOU lives on for whatever the length of that term happens to be.
Excellent. I really appreciate that that look into that. And then one last question. So, so the management team is negotiating with these different employee unions. What happens when the management union is up for negotiation?
Chair Marion, that's a great question. And typically that's a much smaller scope of negotiations where I would be involved, probably Ms. Flynn, and probably either the city manager or assistant city manager representing the city. And it's important to note that the department heads, myself, Ms. Flynn, Mr. Tectalian, we are not part of the Glendale Management Association, so we're not negotiating on our own behalf. But typically that's a much smaller managerial negotiating team, and we would again sit down with representatives of the GMA, and it's the employees that represent our management and mid-management group, from throughout the city. So
excellent. Yeah, and I think it's important for the public to hear that point, that the people who are negotiating aren't actually in the union and aren't negotiating on their own behalf. So I appreciate the clarity and the explanation. If we have no other questions,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. O'Shaughnessy.
Very quickly, am I correct in assuming that the Management Association would be those people who are either salary exempt or salary non-exempt, but they would not be the hourly? The hourly are all in the other employee association if they're not IBEW or one of the unions.
That's correct. Chair Marion, Member O'Shaughnessy, the Management Association, all of the members of that bargaining unit are FLSA exempt. I believe that's what you were asking. In other words, they typically are not entitled to overtime under the law. They are employees that are expected to complete a task, whether it takes them 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week. They typically will not get overtime. There are sometimes some situations, very rare, where managerial employees may be eligible for overtime, and that's a negotiated item. It's not a matter under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So there should be a distinction between, again, negotiated overtime and what these individuals are eligible for under the law.
Does the city of Glendale, in the case of exempt and non-exempt, do they give comp time sometimes instead of additional pay?
Yes, sir, Mr. O'Shaughnessy. Comp time is an option in many cases for taking in place of taking paid overtime. So how that would work is if somebody who is eligible for overtime works 5 hours of overtime, instead of being paid at time and a half, they would get 7.5 hours of comp time. So that is available to our general employees.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Oshasi. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, Ms. Flynn, and Ms. Antonessian.
Chairman Amirian, may I
Yes.
just make a quick comment?
Of course.
This is going back to
Mr. Castor.
yes, thank you. This is going back to the numbers that Ms. Antonessian just mentioned. So it actually comes out 10 instances out of 146 is close to 7%. This usually we say if process is in control if you have less than 5%. This is more than 5%. So even though Mr. Doyle basically also confirmed that they have a willingness to start looking at this more closely. I would recommend that you maybe look at the entire cases and see that you mentioned 400 and something to see if you will find additional examples or cases, because anything above 5% in terms of a mistake or error basically indicates a process that is out of control. Well, not out of control in the bad way. It's above the 5% threshold. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Kasturian. And I just want to echo, I agree. And I think that's why this is, a priority one finding in terms of that specific finding. And I mean, what I'd like is if there's a decision made one way or the other, if you could maybe notify staff and let us know at a future meeting whether you decided to move forward and look, ask each department to look at all of those instances of additional pay, or if you decided for whatever reason not to, so that we can at least get a reasoning, articulated reasoning as to why you decided not to.
Absolutely, Chair Marion, audit committee members, and we will definitely look at that and get back to you. We do plan on sending that report out to all departments on a regular basis, so they will be looking at it more than once a year, and we will be working with them closely to make sure that they have the right procedures in place to do those reviews. So absolutely, we'll get back to you on that.
Excellent, thank you. Sure. Okay, Ms. Sham.
All right. So the next presentation we have prepared for you this afternoon is the Pandemic Response Plan Gap Analysis. This gap analysis was performed at the request of you, the Audit Committee. I was actually going to take this opportunity to thank the members of the committee and especially Chair Mr. Miriam for your guidance and the input provided to us throughout this project. So now, without further ado, Natalie, when you're ready, you may start to present your presentation.
Thank you, Jessie.
Ms. Minami Valdivia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Marion and Audit Committee members. My name is Natalie Minami Valdivia, and I'm a Senior Internal Auditor within the Internal Audit Division. Today, I will be presenting to you the Pandemic Response Plan Gap Analysis completed last quarter. Let me start off my presentation by defining the term pandemic and the authoritative organizations. Merriam-Webster and the World Health Organization, also known as WHO, a pandemic is defined as an epidemic occurring worldwide or over a very wide area across national boundaries. The primary authoritative bodies from the global perspective to our local perspective include the World Health Organization, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health, the United States Department of Health and Human Services Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the California Department of Public Health, and the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health. Now let's take a look at the continuum of the pandemic phases as categorized by the WHO. These include the following 4 global phases: interpandemic, the period between influenza pandemics; pandemic alert, the phase when influenza caused by a new subtype has been identified in humans; pandemic, the period of global spread of human influenza caused by the new subtype; and transition, the phase that occurs as the assessed global risk reduces and there's movement towards recovery. The WHO has also provided the following corresponding risk-based approach to pandemic influenza phases that is utilized by the CDC and the County of Los Angeles. This risk-based approach provides flexibility to accommodate different consequences within individual locations based upon severity of illness and includes the following phases. Preparedness, the advanced preparation based on planning assumptions. Response, actions to identify risk based on current events and available capacities. And recovery, prioritization of areas of greatest need and in the recovery of systems and services. Let's take a closer look at the early COVID-19 timeline. On January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization initially declared the COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern. On March 4th, the state of California, County of Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles, Pasadena, and Long Beach declared state of emergencies. On March 11th, the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic. On March 13th, President Trump declared national emergency. And on March 16th, the city of Glendale declared a local emergency. This was all followed up with a California and City of Los Angeles stay-at-home order. Subsequently, at the regularly scheduled April 30th, 2020 audit committee meeting, the audit committee requested an audit of the city's response to COVID-19. Based upon a meeting with the assistant city manager, a decision was made to perform a pandemic response plan gap analysis. This project was added to the fiscal year 2019-20 audit work plan and was started in May 2020. Now let's take a look at some pandemic examples. In the U.S., we have been fortunate to have had little exposure to pandemics of this magnitude in approximately 100 years. However, that does not mean that pandemics have not occurred. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention website provides histories on a number of pandemics, including the 1918 Spanish flu, the 1957 Asian flu, the 1968 Hong Kong flu, and the 2009 avian flu. As you can see in the PowerPoint slide, 1918 Spanish flu had the highest death toll with 50 million deaths worldwide and 675,000 deaths within the United States. Since then, we have experienced a number of other pandemics, most notably the 1957 Asian flu with 1.1 million deaths worldwide and 116,000 deaths within the United States, the 1968 Hong Kong flu with 1 million deaths and deaths worldwide and 100,000 deaths within the United States, and the 2009 swine flu with 575,000 deaths worldwide and 12,000 within the United States. As of January 28th, or as of this morning, the COVID-19 result has resulted in 2.2 million deaths worldwide, 429,000 deaths in the United States, 38,800 deaths in California, approximately 16,000 deaths in Los Angeles County, and 410 deaths in the city of Glendale. Based upon interviews with the fire department, we learned that in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the city of Glendale hired a city resource specialist to create the city's pandemic response plan in March 2020. This pandemic response plan was drafted, reviewed by the policy group consisting of the city department heads, and was finalized on March 30th, 2020. The objective of this project was to perform a gap analysis of the city's pandemic response plan. The scope of this gap analysis covers the Pandemic Response Plan version 9.25 dated March 30th, 2020. In order to accomplish our objective, we interviewed fire department personnel responsible for the City of Glendale Emergency Operations Plan and the Pandemic Response Plan. We obtained and reviewed the Pandemic Response Plan and pertinent information from the Emergency Preparedness Policy and Emergency Operations Plan. We conducted online research on best practices and available pandemic-related checklists. And we reviewed and compared planning documents, including the city's hazard mitigation plan, the Los Angeles County Emergency Medical Services Agency Pandemic Influenza Plan, the County of Los Angeles Department of Health Services Public Health Biological Incident Pandemic Influenza Guidelines, the Federal Emergency Management Agency Pandemic Influenza Continuity of Operations Annex Template, and the City of Los Angeles Pandemic Annex. We obtained implementation status for the identified best practices based upon a list of activities provided by the fire department, citywide communications to employees, City of Glendale press releases, and interviewed staff from fire management services and public works departments. There were a total of 4 areas.
Okay, it appears that we temporarily lost Miss Minami Valdivia.
Generally, when that happens, it takes like
local authority.
She's back.
Okay, 1 second here. No worries. Miss Minami Valdivia, we lost you right when you started this page. So if you'll just start this slide over again, please.
Sure, sorry.
No worries.
For our first category, we recommended that the pandemic response plan structure include the following elements: purpose, intended audience, relationship to other plans, local authority, roles and responsibilities, pandemic phases, plan review update, and the plan review update. It's important to note that the green check boxes represent the proactively completed recommendations implemented by the city prior to the issuance of our report. For our second category, we recommend that the pandemic response plan include an occupational safety and health controls hierarchy. This hierarchy is intended to prioritize the control methods from most effective and protective to least effective and protective. So we recommended the hierarchy include the engineering and environmental, which are methods that reduce exposure to virus by changing the work environment and isolating the people from the hazard that are not dependent on worker or customer behavior. Administrative, infection control measures that modify a worker's work schedule and tasks in a way to minimize their exposure to influenza in the workplace. Work practices, procedures for safe and proper work that are used to reduce duration, frequency, or intensity of exposure to influenza. And personal protective equipment can help prevent exposures if appropriately used and fitted. For the third category, pandemic operational guidelines, we recommended that pandemic response plan source documents be referenced, that it be updated with the latest information, that it aligns with pandemic phases used by the County of Los Angeles, and that we define the determination of pandemic phases. For the fourth category, the additional mitigation measures, there were 28 additional mitigation measures related to occupational safety and health, community mitigation measures, and pandemic mitigation measures that were identified and recommended to be added to the pandemic response plan. Prior to the issuance of our report, the fire department updated the pandemic response plan to either reference the city's hazard mitigation plan or included them within an appendix to the city's plan. It is also important to note that although these mitigation measures were not documented within the city's pandemic response plan, 26 of these mitigation measures were executed by the city during this pandemic. In conclusion, although best practices may have been excluded from the pandemic response plan, they were proactively implemented by the city, and the pandemic response plan was updated to include the gaps identified prior to the issuance of this report. The next steps are in the recovery phase, the city departments and management will review the after action reports and update the pandemic response plan based upon lessons learned. This concludes my presentation. I'd like to recognize and thank the Fire Management Services departments for their assistance throughout this gap analysis. Fire Chief Lonzis, Deputy Chief Lynch, and Deputy City Manager John Takalian are here, and I are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Minami Valdivia. Questions from the committee members?
I have one question.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy.
This is the first time I've seen this kind of a report for COVID listing Hong Kong and SARS in addition to the Spanish influenza towards the end of World War I. Was AIDS and HIV ever considered pandemic in its early years, or was that always set aside as a special category?
Chair Marion, Member O'Shaughnessy, we took a look at the CDC, and HIV/AIDS was not considered a pandemic. But it was listed as a global epidemic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Chairman Amirian, I have a quick question. This is at Kashidurian.
Yes, Mr. Kashidurian, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This was very informative. I had, I was hoping that we would see something regarding the city's role or maybe city's involvement in offering immunization and the vaccination. I'm guessing it should be part of any plan to deal with the pandemic. And I've been checking the websites that are available, and so far in the city of Glendale, there's just maybe one pharmacy listed, I guess, that offers this vaccinations to the public. But then you look at the map, East Los Angeles, South Los Angeles, so many different places. There are several locations, some of them maybe 2-3 miles apart. And I was wondering how come our city hasn't. And I heard recently that probably there's going to be another site that will start functioning. Can you just maybe explain to us why we haven't been able to, and maybe this is not a question for you, but I'm just curious to know why we haven't been able to be more proactive in this regard.
Would you, Natalie, would you like me to take a stab at that? Unless,
Sure,
Silvio, are you back on?
Yeah, I'm on, John, but go ahead. I will tag on whatever you don't pick up. Go ahead.
Sounds good. Silvio and I can probably tag team this. Chair Marion, members of the committee. It's a very good question, and I think that sort of comes as part of the partial recovery phase at this point, and that's something that we're really at the front end of. Immunizations and vaccination distribution has been of the utmost importance, as we know, but it's also been one of the most difficult things to wrap arms around. The system by which vaccines make their way to the state, then to the actually I should say to the county, and then to the local agencies is extremely complex, and one that even the federal government has a difficult time explaining. The main issue that we're dealing with as a region, as a state, really as a country, is the overall shortage of the vaccines to begin with. Silvio can probably share with you a little bit of information about the number of vaccinations we get in LA County on a weekly basis. And that is nowhere near enough to vaccinate the number of people that need to be. Specific to your question, though, about vaccination locations, the strategy for how vaccinations are going to be distributed has really begun changing quite a bit over the last few weeks. We initially were told that they were going to be through mobile dispensing sites. Then it turned into these larger dispensing locations like Disneyland and Dodger Stadium. And now what we're hearing is that the county's plan has really shifted towards a combination of all, with a real preference on trying to get the vaccines in the hands of pharmacies, healthcare providers, as well as some of the mobile dispensing sites. Some of the healthcare providers, even they're looking at going and working with dentists who are qualified to inoculate the public. The problem again is the actual supply. The thought has been that, or the hope has been that with the new administration, California officials were hoping that we would get a larger allotment in the state. But even by what we're hearing from Washington up until maybe 2 days ago, is that the amount of production just doesn't quite match up to the demand at this point. Specific to Glendale, we may have just the one pharmacy at this point. However, the county does plan on utilizing the Civic Auditorium coming up pretty soon as a mobile dispensing site. That'll be a regional site where the general public will have the opportunity to go get vaccinated using the state's appointment system.
Thank you. Could you also let us know who makes decisions as far as the locations are concerned? Because, like, you know, I mean, I can tell you check the map, East Los Angeles, South Los, you see several locations. And for a city of 200,000 like Glendale, and if you check the population distribution, we have a higher share of elderly people, and not all of them have access to, means of transportation. So I'm a little bit curious to know, what is the mechanism through which these locations, I understand the overall shortage, but the shortage also applies to South Los Angeles and East Los Angeles. What is the mechanism through which these sites have been identified?
That's a conversation piece that comes up during weekly communications with the county health director. In fact, all cities have that specific question, I would say, is how do we make sure that our city gets it? I'll let Silvio kind of chime in on the specifics of that, but in general, it's really the county of Los Angeles that's identifying the larger sites. And cities such as ourselves have offered up a number of different locations within our own communities and have offered to work with the county to get them up and running as quickly as possible. Silvio, anything else?
Yeah, thank you, John, Mr. Chairman, committee. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to say a few things. To answer Commissioner Kashadorian's specific question, the 5 mega sites that the county put on were decided through the county, one in each supervisorial district. So that's how those 5 sites were located. And then Dodger Stadium is obviously a mega site available for the city of Los Angeles. That's how those 6 sites were decided. As John mentioned, we have plans here in our city to open a site at the Civic Auditorium. We as the fire department are also in the early stages of planning the ability to mobile vaccinate our community for the elderly people that are unable to travel and unable to take even a dial-a-ride to a vaccination site right now doesn't work because the dial-a-ride can't wait there for several hours for you to be vaccinated and then bring you back. So we are in the process right now of being ready to establish multiple locations within our community. One of the things that we will seek approval through County Public Health for in the future is having our firefighters provide mobile vaccine at our senior facilities, both the senior center, Spar Heights, some of the complexes in town that have, a high population of senior residents. All of those things are things that we're working on and that we hope to receive approval through County Public Health. But as was very well articulated by Mr. Taktalian, the vaccine is just not available. There is no vaccine. I'm assigned on the county incident management team that manages the 6 sites throughout LA as an agency rep for the other 28 fire departments in the county. And I was part of a meeting today that the vaccine pipeline is just not open yet. It's just not happening. So rest assured that our community is at the forefront of our thoughts, that we are putting plans in place, and we do have written, agreed, approved plans for the day that we get vaccination in our hands. We will do everything in our power to make sure that we vaccinate our community.
Thank you.
One other quick question.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy?
Would you consider, and being in a motorized wheelchair, I definitely appreciate there's no way that I can go to Dodger Stadium. It would be interesting, given the Biden-Harris administration has mentioned FEMA and mentioned using more National Guard possibilities, if you might look at the National Guard Armory in Glendale as a possible additional location, though I do like the sound of the mobile operations out of our various fire stations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parhon, do you have any questions, comments?
No, I don't. I'm good.
Thank you very much for that. I have several questions. So was there a pandemic response plan prior to the March 2020 pandemic response plan that was commissioned?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Deputy Chief Bill Lynch here. The prior documentation regarding the pandemic was identified partially in our emergency operation plan and as well as in the Castle Hazard Mitigation Plan. And so this document was created to encompass the pandemic as a whole. So if that answers your question, there was some information, but this was created to encapsulate the entire pandemic.
Were there any learnings, for example, from 2009? I think it was, at the time, it was Chief Scoggins, during the swine flu. And I know the swine flu was different in that it was wide in scale, but didn't have the same impact in terms of mortality. But were there any learnings that were carried over from 2009 into the city's pandemic response plan for 2020?
I would say there were a number of things that were learned as this COVID progressed. There were a number of things changing all the time. Some of the things that came over from 09, I think, were the basics, the hand washing, the hand washing, taking care of general hygiene, spacing out from one another. But this is pretty unique. The COVID, and I can honestly say, like she mentioned in the report, there were a number of things that weren't actually listed initially, of 26 items, but we were already doing them. So pretty proud of the fact that we were able to get ahead of this and make the appropriate, take the appropriate precautions to take care of not only our people, but the public.
Thank you. And, Chief Lanza spoke to representing the city in terms of, these different various task force. Can you talk a little bit more about that information exchange and the evaluation of that information, at a city management level as it's conveyed to the city council, who then has to make decisions about the direction in which the city is going to move?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So since the pandemic started, I would say since probably March 15th of 2020, a task force was compiled, comprised of the city manager's office, the police department, the fire department, the 3 local hospitals, our Glendale Unified School District, and our Glendale Community College. Each of us have gotten together every Monday morning, literally since March 15th, on a phone call. Some days it's 5 minutes, other days it's been an hour and a half. And we discuss the trends, what we're seeing, the hospital impacts, surges in patient condition, number of patients, ICU usage. We share a number of items across the spectrum. We, as the fire department, for example, would tell them we're seeing an increase in our call volume. We're seeing an increase in our COVID call volume because we have a specific call code for COVID responses. And all that information was shared and continues to be shared to this day. That information is conveyed through the city manager's office to our council on multiple presentations. I think I've given to date 15 presentations to council of the information that we gather from those meetings, as well as meetings that I'm part of at the county level and at the Department of Public Health level. So we share all that information. I think the collaboration has been outstanding from the start. We early on, if you remember, back in April, May, the very, very hot topic was our skilled nursing facilities and the high number of cases in our skilled nursing facilities. We, as the fire department, for example, because of that, had our EMS section contacting all 24 of our skilled nursing facilities on a daily basis to make sure they had appropriate PPE, make sure they had appropriate staff because their staff was becoming COVID positive. So all of those type of things we were doing based on the information being shared amongst that group. So very, very good collaboration and cooperation and communication sharing has gone on throughout the entire pandemic. It continues.
Thank you. Thank you for laying that out. And if maybe, Mr. Taftalian, if you could speak to, what type of leeway do municipalities have in terms of evaluating the information that they receive, that Mr. Lanzas receives, the orders that come down from the state or from the county? What type of evaluations are you doing of the information that you receive and how it pertains to Glendale's specific population, the impacts some of those orders have? How much leeway, if any, is there in order for the city to kind of do their own thing as it pertains to looking after the interests of the municipality and its stakeholders?
Well, I think that question can be answered in a number of different ways, but the way that I'm going to try to address that most appropriately is that as a charter city, the city has quite a bit of leeway or discretion to utilize the information in the local situation in responding to something like a pandemic. Certainly, you want to take the local impacts into consideration as you're developing policies or local orders, emergency orders that might limit certain things or curtail certain activities. So the city does have that discretion. In the city's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was quite a bit of coordination, I think, up front. And we realized very early on the need to communicate and coordinate not only with the County of Los Angeles, but also with some of our local neighboring cities. whether it was the city of Burbank, Agora Hills, anything really in LA County. And we also looked at Pasadena, who actually has their own health department. So they were doing some things a little bit differently. So, we could have gotten way ahead or stuck way behind in taking certain actions. But Glendale, I would say that if we went back and tried to recreate the record, we were at the forefront of doing a number of things very proactively, whereas some of the cities took a few weeks to catch up, whether it was shutting down a park or parks, trails. But I think primarily the one that probably made the biggest headlines initially was we were one of the first, if not the first city in LA County to require face coverings. And that was a very contentious issue, as you all might recall. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, what's interesting, and I think, both as a resident of Glendale and as a member of the audit committee looking at the city's pandemic response, what's interesting to me is as we move forward, we've had impacts as a result of some of these decisions, to businesses within the city, obviously to our school children, and and of course, it goes without saying, and I've mentioned it several times before, also to the city employees who have been affected by the change in the manner in which essential business is conducted. I'm curious if there are plans to evaluate the city's steps taken and responses as it pertains to the impact it's had on those bigger groups, specifically businesses within the city, and of course, children who are still not in school and not having regular opportunities to have their needs met, especially those of lower socioeconomic, and kind of, I think the word escapes me, but vulnerable groups, as it were, and also just in general, school-age children, socializing and missing almost a year of school in terms of being able to be there in person. So, are there any plans to look back at to review the specific decisions made on a city level vis-a-vis some of these state orders and the impact that it's had on businesses from an economic standpoint, and children from a educational and sociological standpoint?
Well, it's a good question. Silvio, you had something to say?
Go ahead. I'll touch on it if you.
I was just going to say it's an interesting question. I think it's a good question. It's a difficult question to answer though, and part of the reason is there's while the city had some level of discretion as I described, quite a bit of discretion is really taken away when the state of California issues orders that essentially curtail your ability to override. Cities can't undo what the state or the county does in terms of not following the orders. We can't ignore the orders. What we can always do is make the orders even stricter at the local level. So at this point, whether we went back and reviewed whether it was a good decision to shut down outdoor dining, as an example, a few weeks ago or not, is sort of irrelevant at the local level, because that wasn't a decision that the city of Glendale actually made, and it's not a decision that the city council could have made any differently. With respect to the impact that it's had on school children, clearly a topic of discussion across the country. While we've supported our colleagues and the school district administration in that's not something that we've really had much discretion or involvement in. Those decisions have really been made at the federal, the state, and the local school district level.
Got it. And just to follow up on that, and I appreciate the insight into it. It's I know you and I have also had a past conversation regarding this. And I'm curious just how, when you say that the city council and we've heard that. I've heard that, the municipality has no ability to loosen any order that comes down from the county level or from the state level. What are the repercussions if a municipality looks at some of the information that they receive and says, this doesn't make sense to us on our local level, and decides to go against a county or a state proclamation? Would you just briefly describe what occurs in terms of the repercussions to the municipality?
I would not be able to, and I apologize, that's my dog, so I can't shut off my microphone and I can't go deal with her right now. I'm likely not the best person to answer that question. I would defer that question over to our city attorney's office.
And allow me to jump in. This is Lucy Varpetian from the city attorney's office. We, I think, have gone into areas of discussion that are beyond the scope of this audit. We're talking about specifically state orders, and it's not within the city's authority, for example, to look into the repercussions for school-age children, although, again, it's of impact to probably every parent in this community, but it's not something that is within the purview of the city's ability to review. And so I would just caution us to keep the discussion to the scope of the audit.
Just so that I understand, thank you, Ms. Varpetian. Just so that I understand, you're telling me that the city can't look at what the impact of decisions made on the state and county level, that how they impact the stakeholders of the city, their actual residents?
I believe that is beyond the scope of the audit that was done. So yes, that would be beyond what we would be able to discuss today.
Okay. And I mean, okay. As I understand, the audit covers, a pandemic response plan by the city. And, and so I think the question does touch upon how, I believe in the actual audit, there's a talk about recovery, response and recovery. And I would offer that this is covered within the recovery phase. And, there doesn't have to be an answer now. It's a big question. But I would like, some follow-up from staff regarding, how the city during this recovery phase and during a preparedness phase for, any upcoming pandemics evaluates how decisions made, impact its stakeholders. I believe it's within the purview. And I think it's an important question that needs to be answered. Mr. Totalian?
Chair, I think to maybe try to answer your question in the fairest way, in accordance with what Lucy just described as what was and wasn't part of the audit, the city of Glendale doesn't get to choose which laws it's going to follow and the ones that it's not. So if the state is issuing any kind of state orders, or if the county is issuing any state orders, we're bound to abide by those orders. I think that the fair response to your question is, as those decisions are being made in real time, as those conversations are occurring, as those situations are being evaluated, we have the ability and perhaps even the obligation in certain circumstances to share our local experiences, our needs, our concerns with our elected leaders at the local, county, or state level, so that they're aware of what the implications are before they issue their findings and issue their orders. I think that's probably the fairest way to describe how this process works.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Ms. Varpetian, did you have anything else? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, thank you. I think Mr. Totalian covered it.
I appreciate your input. And if we have no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you to Mr. Totalian, Chief Lanzas, Deputy Chief Lynch, and the staff that worked on this particular audit. I think it's an important one, and hopefully it won't be necessary again for a very long time. Let's, Michelle, if we can move on, please.
All right. So that concludes our presentations for the completed projects. So now I would like to just go over the rest of the activity report.
Please do.
So the section 2 is in progress projects. As of December 31st, 2020, there was one in progress audit project. Samuel is the auditor assigned to conduct this audit. I was going to say, because it's been almost a month, so we have a few other projects we're working on right now, in addition to the one, but that was as of the end of last year. So the next section is continuous auditing. So during this past quarter, we completed the duplicate payment test run that covers April 1 through June 30th, 2020. Samuel worked on this project, and he actually found one duplicate payment and one inaccurate payment. So then again, the next 3 sessions, section 4, 5, and 6, are all related to audit follow-up. So we have completed our quarterly follow-up for outstanding audit issues by communicating with department representatives on implementation status. So for this past quarter, we have followed up with department on 40 outstanding items from 8 completed audit projects, of which 12 were implemented. So there were 28 outstanding items at the end of the quarter. The next session is summary of outstanding priority 1 audit issues. So there are a total of 6 outstanding priority items at the end of December 2020. And the last session related to quarterly follow-up is outstanding audit issues meeting certain discussion criteria. So for the past quarter, there was one outstanding audit issues that entered into one of these 3 event categories. Specifically, it's one item from that administrative citation audit has been open for more than 2 years. So any questions on these items?
Okay, so let's one second here. So in terms of item number 5, so these are outstanding priority 1 audit issues that are still within kind of the time period where we're just being notified of them, correct?
Yes and no. So if you recall, the first time, for example, the Modern Parking Inc. contract audit, when first time we listed them, I think the committee, the audit committee members actually suggested we added a note, due to COVID, we may not meeting those established anticipated completion dates. So, so these, based on our, priority, our own guideline of priority 1 needs to be completed within 3 months, and then 2 is 6, and then 3 is 9 months. So they're not, these 2 are not, Modern Parking Inc. is already past that due date. But if you recall last quarter, we have a total of 6 items listed from this audit. And then Ani actually worked closely with the department and the vendor and made a lot of progress. And so we dropped it to 2 from this, from 6 to 2. For the second one, the Hoover Toll and Capital Recycle Water Audit, that one we had a new date that we obtained from the department. So that was June 30th. So those are the actual date we obtained from the department. But for the remaining one, we just basically push out for another quarter when they don't complete within that initial anticipated completion date.
Okay, thank you for that. So are there, let's kind of parse this section by section. So are there any questions from audit committee members regarding section 5 here, these 6 specific recommendations? Okay, seeing no questions. Now, the administrative citations audit, can you just explain exactly what the status is of this, please?
So, Ani may add more detail, but the issue, this particular issue at the time of the audit, there could be, it's related to redesign the citation form. So there could be multiple violations. So then sometimes the staff run out of a room to write the citations, and then, or they could write wrong codes, or the pre-printed codes on the form might not be the ones that most frequently cited. And then another issue is there is a payment instruction that printed on the form that is kind of confusing, that require rewarding. So those are basically the issues related to why we recommended the redesign of the form. At this point, it is assigned to actually a Lean Six Sigma team to look into. They are starting a new round. We're starting a new round of Lean Six Sigma team training. So this will be part of that class project, their team project. So then they are going to work with the stakeholders and then to determine what's the best way to implement, and then, or if this is still an issue, you know, with the new systems being implemented, and with COVID, there's some new things we need to consider. Should we just do electronic form? So there are a lot of things to consider. That's just my 2 cents. We do have a department representative, I think. And Ani, if there's any more to add, like, still here. Do we have?
Yes, we have John Brownell and Peter Zovak are present.
Okay, we do have a couple representatives from the department that could answer any further questions.
Do any of the commissioners have a question regarding this particular administration citations audit? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item, please.
So last, we just have one more session within this report, section 7. Mm-hmm. So it's just listed a routine team assignment to the 3 committees or teams that participated by internal audit. That basically concludes my presentation.
Excellent.
Report for this quarter.
Thank you, Ms. Zhang, and thank you to the audit team. Let's move on to item number 7, please.
Item number 7, audit committee or staff comments.
We'll start with the audit committee. Any comments?
No.
I would just like to commend the audit staff and everyone for the thoroughness on all these reports. They are consistently ahead of the curve. It's very rare that we ask a question that you need to get back to us on. So just every once in a while, it's nice to remind them that they are well appreciated and that we appreciate all the amount of work they do and how thorough they do it.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Mr.
On behalf of my team, thank you, Mr. O'Shaughnessy, for that comment.
Yes, and I'd like to echo those sentiments for sure. Any other comments from the committee members? I'd like to just echo Mr. O'Shaughnessy's comments. Thank you to staff for the thoroughness of your work, and also the preparation of the CAFR. I've been on this committee now for, gosh, I think this is my either 10th or 11th year, and there are a lot of jokes about the CAFR. But there's an immense amount of work that goes into it, and there is an exceptional amount of great information in there in terms of having insight into the city's operations. And so I would really encourage members of the public who are interested in looking under the hood, as it were, to take a look at that comprehensive annual financial report document. And I just wanted to thank staff for the work that they've done, and also to all of the department heads who have been working throughout this period. 2020 was a very difficult year for everybody. And I just wanted to thank the committee members and the staff for the continued work that they've done. Are there any staff comments?
I just want to add, for any audit we do, there is a lot of interaction with the department personnel, and then we have been consistently receiving the tremendous support from each department, and we really appreciate that. Without that, and it's not possible for us to do audits. So there's a lot of interruption to their already busy schedule. And we are sensitive to it, and so we really appreciate all the support from each and every department.
Thank you, Ms. Young. And before we move to the next item, I did have a question regarding an outstanding item, which was our 5th member of the committee. Has there been any movement on that in terms of, I know that Mr. Sarturian is still being copied on reports. Can we just get an update as to where we're at with that, so that we can have a complete committee?
So the most recent update I have is basically we asked city clerk's office what's the status, and then what we received is he is still on the committee, but then city clerk's office will follow up with CM's office or city council who appointed that member. So that's as far as I know.
So just to understand, so he's still a member of the committee? even having
Yes,
been
he
absent
is.
for more than a year?
I think maybe Lucy can help on that, but my understanding is he stays on until he is voluntarily, quit or being replaced by a member of the city council.
Mr. Marion, that's correct. Unless he steps down voluntarily, the position remains, and if he steps down voluntarily, then the position is vacant. But if he has not voluntarily stepped down, then he continues to be in the position until removed. And so I do believe that there is, the matter was discussed more recently. So hopefully by the next meeting, there could be a better update.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, and just a couple of comments on that. I think it's, I'm not really sure which council member is responsible, and I know Mr. Saturian. So this isn't a reflection upon him. There are issues in everybody's lives that we are not privy to. However, the committee, there's a reason why there are 5 members assigned to a committee, and I'm not really certain what one of the city council members who appointed Mr. Saturian is waiting for. I understand that there have been some outstanding situations, but this has been an issue since his appointment. So I think I speak on behalf of the other committee members as well, as saying that it's important that we have, a fully operational committee of 5 members, and I would strongly ask that the city councilman responsible for this treats this with the importance it deserves. Okay, let's move on to new business.
Item number 8, new business.
Do we have any new business? Seeing none, did we, just to go back to item number 3, did we have any calls?
No, we don't.
Okay, and let's move on to item number 9.
Item number 9, adjournment.
Do I have a motion?
Move.
Okay.
Let's second that.
And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.